what is grit? Let's start with what is grit.
I think my definition, I will speak for myself. People probably think of grit as just perseverance, but I think of it as perseverance and passion, working really hard and being resilient in the pursuit of a goal that you love. I think so. I think the word, brings up images of, John Wayne or, like the sort of, like, oh, I just keep going, like the Duracell bunny. But if you have persistence in the service of, making your parents happy, or if you're really driven by fear of, disappointing people, or if you're chasing some kind of external reward, like a higher salary, that isn't actually the kind of grit that I am looking to study and that I observe in the world-class performers that I've had the privilege of interviewing.
So then explain then what is the difference between the world class performers and then the next rung? What's the biggest thing that pops out of your experiences?
So the fact that grit emerges as especially predictive in those very challenging and elite contexts, like who makes it through West Point, or who makes it through special forces training, or who wins the national spelling bee. When you look at those elite populations, which by the way is not the same thing as getting good grades or coming to school on time or getting your taxes done, right? Like it's an elite level of performance, and you're asking what makes the very, very, very best different from others. Well, pretty good, but maybe not the best. It really is this sustained effort, call it perseverance, and this sustained commitment, call that passion, perseverance plus passion, sustained over the long term. And and to realize why that's so important, there are alternatives, right? I mean, you could be really crazy intense for a day or a week or a month, but then lose that effort and lose that interest, lose that perseverance, lose that passion. That's why the sustained part is really important here, and I think signature to grit. And notice also that this is not about talent or about IQ or about other things that are probably relevant. And I'm not saying those things are not relevant. I'm just saying that those are not grit. And they don't have the expectation, I don't think, these admissions officers, if I can speak for Bill because I know his views on this pretty well. I'm sure they're very similar to many other admissions officers, which is, they don't necessarily have the expectation that you have to do that same thing for the rest of your life or even in college. But they're looking for kids to have learned those life lessons about sticking with something and about getting into something at a more than superficial level. So
That's a key reason why this goes well beyond athletics, why it goes well beyond academics, because these are people who are selecting, you're being chosen for a certain path in the future, and they want to see somebody who sticks to it, who's got passion and perseverance.
yeah, and I'll emphasize, speaking for Bill and others, that it's not the only thing they're looking for. By the way, I think admissions officers are looking for nice people. I mean, how do you find the kid who's nice? And there was a great New York Times op-ed recently about, where's the box that you check on your application? Like, I'm a nice person, and the story is about a high school student who was particularly just, respectful of, for example, the custodial staff in the high school, and that should be weighted in admissions. So it's not. Yeah, I mean, and when I say character, I really mean it's much more broad than grit. So my own daughters are 15 and 14, and of course I want them to be gritty, but before grit come many other character strengths that I think are more important, right? Being an honest person, being a kind person. A lot of hard work doesn't have an immediate payoff.
Right.
That's one of the hard lessons for kids. Like, you're not gonna, like, if you hit most buttons on websites, like something good happens right away.
Right.
But that's not life. And maybe it'll be next season that it'll even show up, right? Or maybe it'll be a life lesson where 2 years from now you'll figure it out. Or when you're writing an essay and you're rewriting it, or you're rewriting, sometimes when I write, it gets worse before it gets better. So this idea of immediate gratification enabled by technologies, it's a really captivating one. As a scientist, I can't really say because I don't have a time machine, but I think intuitively as a mother, And as a person who, thinks about these things as, someone who didn't grow up with it, I do worry. Called the
Yeah,
grittiest country.
grittiest country on earth.
A lot of other countries would be like offended by that statement.
Yes.
Finland has a very specific, and I think uh, it's a strong culture of pursuing hard things, even when everyone else has given up and gone home. And, this goes back decades. They've often been historically in situations where, their army was outnumbered, or, it was just very clear that the odds were against them. And rationally speaking, one might have asked, like, well, this would be the time to surrender, right? When you're outnumbered, when you're outgunned. And Finland has had a very proud kind of I'll show you attitude about these underdog situations. And I think that persists today. Of course, they haven't been at war for a very long time, but it's, this word that they have called sisu is spelled SISU, and, really translates more to the perseverance part of grit than I think the passion piece. But nevertheless, I think it's interesting to have an entire culture of, what, about 5 million people who have an identity. Like, we're not the kind of people who give up. And I think what interests me about teenagers, my kids are 14 and 15, but I'm really thinking about kids in middle school, high school, and even into college. It's during those years where you figure out who you are. And it would be a wonderful thing if, while you are doing that, you ask yourself, would I like to be the kind of person who, like a Finn, doesn't give up when things are really hard. Um, I hasten to add, because I know a lot of high achieving students make an error, I think. So I want to hasten to kind of say one more thing about that. Not giving up doesn't mean like beating your head against the same wall over and over again. I mean, if you try to do something many times and it doesn't work out, then I think you do have to take stock and say, like, what could I try that's different, right? So, if you have a class that you're not doing well in, and, you're like, oh, I'll just study more, and then you study more, and you're still not doing well, and then you do that again, and you're still not doing well, then you have to say, oh, well, maybe I should go to office hours, maybe I need a tutor, maybe I need to get my friend to help me understand this. Not giving up doesn't mean doing the same dumb thing over and over again, but it does mean, being very committed to some, overall project, even if you're flexible on how you're going to get there. Correct, but, if you can't get over it, maybe you can get around it. And, if turning right doesn't work, turn left. And so this lesson, which is really hard to communicate because it's subtle, so what it means to be resilient and gritty means, in a way, to be stubborn, but also, importantly, to be flexible, right? Like, if I'm not getting to the gym at 6 in the morning, and, I try again, I don't work, well, maybe I need to go to the gym at night.
Right. Right.
Maybe the afternoon's a better time for me. And I think that idea of being supple and to bend a little bit, I think that's very important. And I have to say, like, I do work